In the suffocating heat of the forge, sparks dance wildly into the air, accompanied by the rhythmic, deafening tatak of metal striking metal. A young boy with blonde hair stands before the inferno, his face illuminated by the harsh orange glow, sweat beading on his skin as he struggles to catch his breath. Before him rests a massive, glowing blade, radiating with an intense, blistering heat. Determination twists his features into a fierce scowl, his eyes burning with an unyielding intensity. He lets out a strained, guttural yell, pouring every ounce of his willpower into the monumental task. With a thunderous crash, he bites down the sword, sending an explosive shower of sparks scattering into the deep shadows of the room. The rhythmic pounding fades into a distant memory, replaced by a softer, nostalgic echo. Ever since I was young, Arhan muses, my father would often tell me a story. A young Arhan stands beside his father in a grand, dimly lit hall, both gazing up at an imposing portrait of a massive, armored warrior holding a greatsword. Remember this well, Arhan? His father's voice echoes solemnly. As a member of the Karavan family, this is a story you must remember. His father gently pats Arhan's head, standing beneath a pristine, silvery sword mounted elegantly on the stone wall. Although we may currently be living in this small village far from the capital, 200 years ago, our family's status was unmatched by any other. A proud, unwavering smile graces his father's face as he continues his grand tale. We had a knight called the God of War, and righteous supervisors favored by the king and respected by everyone. Young Arhan squints, leaning into his father's affectionate hand as it ruffles his blonde hair. Our family was chosen by the sword, his father beams, and we produced swordmasters for generations. The gleaming blade on the wall seems to catch the ethereal light, a silent testament to a glorious past. That's why everyone treated them with respect. The portrait of their fierce ancestor looms over them, embodying the heavy title they carried. The Invincible Protectors, Karavan. His father's hand rests firmly on young Arhan's small shoulder, an invisible passing of the torch. Arhan, you will take over my position and become the head of the Karavan family. Kneeling down to meet his son Itwai in the warm light of the window, his father smiles. You must always live with the pride of the Karavan family flowing through your veins. The weight of a heavy destiny hangs in his father's words, to regain the family's glory, and stand tall once more as the protector of this land. The memory shifts to the present, revealing the beautiful, rustic homes of their humble village bathed in the golden hour of sunset. That is the duty of the caravans, the narration concludes. The sun shines brilliantly over an endless expanse of golden wheat, swaying gently in the warm summer breeze. The heroic tales of our family that father used to tell me, Arhan reflects quietly. A much older Arhan wipes sweat from his brow, his hands calloused as he swiftly cuts through the thick wheat with a sickle. Are probably just tall tales. He sighs internally, feeling the sting of reality. Disgraced nobles clinging to their past glory. Gathering the freshly cut wheat into his arms, he rationalizes the truth with a hint of resignation. That's a pretty common thing. Stretching his tired back under the clear blue sky, he glances at the other working farmers. If the stories about Karavan were true, we wouldn't be living in this poor village as landlords. Laughter erupts as Arhan jokes around with his elderly tenant farmers, a perfect picture of humble camaraderie. We wouldn't be spending time doing farm work with the tenants every day. His hand gently brushes over the rich, golden harvest piled high in a wooden cart. Exhaling deeply, Arhan wipes his sweaty neck with a towel, looking utterly exasperated. Also, there are so many holes in father's stories. His mind drifts back to the dark, quiet halls of their estate. The founder of the family, the idolized figure in the portrait. He recalls the family heirloom, gleaming pristine in the shadows, even the sword that's been passed down the family. Flashes of countless ancient texts flutter through his mind. For something supposedly made hundreds of years ago, it's way too sharp and intact, and most damningly, not a single history book in the kingdom mentions the name of our alleged ancestor, Liam Karavan. He remembers the exhausting nights spent slumped over a wooden desk, surrounded by massive piles of open books, having fallen fast asleep from fruitless, desperate research. I couldn't find it mentioned even once. Standing tall beside his loaded cart, overlooking the distant mountains, he makes his peace with reality. Considering all of that, there's only one conclusion. They're just tall tales made up to give us descendants something to be proud of. Young Master Tilda, what are you doing standing there zoning out? A voice calls out, snapping him sharply out of his reverie. He turns to see Kun and the other villagers waving enthusiastically. It's time for our snack break. If you don't hurry, all the warm bread will be gone. An older villager teases him playfully. If you come later, I'll eat all of them myself. Arhan's eyes go wide in mock outrage. What? Wait up. A bright, genuine smile spreads across Arhan's face, the sun catching his blonde hair. So what if Karavan isn't a great family? He thinks to himself. Everyone here welcomes me. His boots step lightly through the dusty path of the wheat field, kicking up small clouds of dirt. He breaks into a joyous run toward his people. And I love this place where I can live with them. The peaceful image of his sprint shatters, bleeding downwards into a horrific, dark reflection, a pool of blood, a severed head, and a menacing shadow. That's the Karavan I want, just like how things are now. The once golden wheat is now painted crimson, thick drops of blood sliding off the husks. Or so I thought, in my peaceful and complacent state. Back in the past, a vibrant sunset paints the sky in fiery hues as Arhan mounts his horse. Looks like I've harvested enough for today, so I'm going to head to the market in the neighboring town. He glances over his shoulder at his people, a thoughtful smile on his lips. I was thinking of picking up anything you guys need while I'm there. Kun rubs the back of his neck, grinning sheepishly. Arhan points out, would Kun like some apples? He's been grumbling about not having seen any fruit for a while, right? Kun's face lights up immediately. Oh, that would be great, young master. Arhan then turns his attention to an older woman. And Marino's youngest daughter's birthday is coming up soon, so I'll buy her a pretty doll if I see one. The woman clasps her hands in delighted surprise. Oh, how did you know that? With a charming wink, Arhan puffs out his chest proudly. I know everything. I'm going to be the next lord around here, you know. He waves high in the air as his horse begins to trot toward the setting sun. All right, I'm off. See you all later. His hair blows freely in the wind, a perfect picture of youthful optimism. Have a safe trip, young Master Arhan, the villagers call out. The warm, serene twilight settles deeply over the rustling wheat fields, completely masking the unspeakable tragedy to come. The villagers chat warmly amongst themselves. There's no one like our young master, Kun remarks. An older man nods in agreement. You're right, he's so different from other nobles. I'm worried some noble lady will try to snatch him up. Kun claps his hands together, smiling brightly at his friends. Well then, before it gets too late, let's finish up the rest of our work. He turns back to his peers. Today's the day we have a regular meeting with the... A sudden, vicious streak of blood violently interrupts his words, slashing horizontally across his vision. The world spins out of control. Kun's severed head flies into the air. Marino reaches out in agonizing slow motion, horror dawning on her face. Lord! A geyser of blood erupts from Kun's collapsing body, showering Marino in warmth. Kun, she whispers, her voice trembling into the bloody mist. She stands frozen, thick blood speckling her pale face, her mind utterly unable to process the nightmare unfolding before her. Ha! The golden fields are instantly desecrated, painted with violent, visceral slashes of crimson as senseless slaughter erupts. A cold, authoritative thought echoes through the carnage. This land must be erased. A tall figure with long, flowing white hair strides leisurely through the blood-soaked wheat, a dark cloak trailing behind him. Two elder farmers stand paralyzed, cold sweat pouring down their faces as the embodiment of death approaches. A close-up of a terrified, quivering eye captures the sheer panic. Who are you? The white-haired swordsman doesn't answer. He simply stands over them, his unsheathed blade gleaming menacingly under the dying sun. He looks out over the cowering villagers with chilling, absolute apathy. This land. With terrifying speed, the man becomes a blur, his sword carving through the crying villagers like grain before a scythe. A torrent of blood splashes violently across the sky. The killer's face remains entirely devoid of emotion. Must be erased, he finishes smoothly, turning his back on the fresh corpses piling in the dirt. Night has fallen completely. A sickening thud breaks the dead silence as fresh red apples tumble into the dirt, followed closely by a soft, brown teddy bear. The dropped gifts roll limply to a stop at a pair of leather boots. Arhan has returned. Arhan's face is drained of all color. Sweat beads on his trembling skin as his breath hitches in his throat. Everyone. He stands alone in the dark, completely surrounded by the butchered remains of the people he loved, their faces frozen in eternal agony. Why is everyone dead? Suddenly, an aged hand clamps firmly over his eyes from behind, plunging him into darkness. The old butler pulls Arhan into a desperate, crushing embrace, tears streaming down the old man's weathered face. Don't look, young master. Surrounded by the massacre, the butler forcefully shields the boy's eyes as Arhan stammers, completely broken. Be butler, butler. A grim narrator's voice concludes the tragedy, saying that the caravan should be erased. In the distance, the white-haired reaper still walks among his victims. It only took 10 minutes. The memory flashes back to the merciless slaughter, the swordsman cleaving through fleeing villagers without a hint of hesitation or mercy, wielding his blade with cold indifference. Men and women sprint in blind terror, tears streaming down their faces, but the pale shadow is always right behind them, closing the distance. In that time, he took the lives of half the villagers. Under the glow of a haunting, violet moon, the grand estate of the Karavan family stood silent. Inside, the once pristine halls were painted in dark crimson, with lifeless bodies littering the cold stone floor as a young Arhan walked numbly through the carnage. He paused, his gaze dropping to the brutalized face of an older guard. Pure shock paralyzed him, the breath hitching in his throat. Everywhere he looked, horrific wounds and lifeless eyes stared back at him. Unable to bear the crushing weight of the massacre, Arhan clutched his hair, a desperate, maddened groan escaping his lips as he sank to the floor. Suddenly, a voice broke through the nightmare, screaming his name, Arhan. Through tear-blurred eyes, he looked up, whispering, Mother, as he saw her rush toward him in terror. She threw herself into his arms, enveloping him in a desperate embrace. You're safe, my son, she cried softly into his shoulder, relief washing over her trembling voice as she sniveled. I'm so glad. But as Arhan placed his hand on her back, he felt something terrible beneath his fingers. His expression froze, eyes widening as the cold dread settled in his core. I realized, Arhan thought, the horror of their situation finally sinking in. He stared at his trembling, blood-soaked hands, muttering, Why? The red light of the hallway felt like a suffocating cage around them. For some reason, the Swordmaster who had wiped out half of the Karavan territory in an instant didn't harm his parents, instead leaving them with a chilling promise. I will return in a month. Why us? Arhan muttered. Tears streamed down his dirt-stained face as his grip tightened on the hilt of his sword, asking why. Why are you doing this? He screamed to the heavens, his voice cracking with agony. What crime did we ever commit? Kneeling in the dirt, shielding his mother, he glared at the towering figure of the mysterious Swordmaster, asking, What? Why? The man looked down with a glowing crimson eye, his expression completely devoid of emotion as he replied, I am just following orders. After he left behind his incomprehensible words, the true devastation of the territory was laid bare. One by one, the surviving villagers made their difficult choice. Packing what little they had left, they began to leave the ruined village at sunset. That might have been the only way to save lives, but the Karavan family wasn't even given that choice. In the dark, quiet confines of his study, Arhan's father stood alone facing the bookshelves. He relentlessly bashed his head against the wood, blood streaming down his face as he muttered his broken oaths. It is my solemn duty to behead the great evil that will soon come. I swear to the heavens, I will never. I will not abandon this, he vowed. Meanwhile, in the moonlit forest, his mother called out to him softly, Arhan. She gripped his shoulders, her smile strained but determined. I've instructed the butler to prepare a carriage. You will leave the territory with him, go as far away as possible. Arhan's eyes widened in panic, crying, WH, what are you saying? You have to leave too, and father too will take him with us and go together. She looked down, a tragic acceptance in her eyes, saying, Your father cannot leave this place. Because until the very end, he will want to face the enemy as the Lord of Karavan. And as his partner, I will be with him until that moment. She turned away, the evening wind catching her dress as she prepared to walk back to her certain death. Arhan begged her to let them all go, but she stopped him with a harsh truth. Remember this, Arhan. The stories your father told you are not true. All of those tales of a righteous guardian, an invincible protector. They are nothing more than history filled with lies. So won't you make a promise to your mother? She asked gently. She pushed him into the arms of the old butler. Butler, please, take good care of Arhan. Make sure he gets as far away as possible before that man comes. The butler pulled the thrashing boy tightly away as Arhan screamed desperately for his mother. Standing alone amidst the falling leaves, tears streamed down her smiling face as she bid him farewell. I love you, my child. Back in the manor, the heavy door to the study creaked open into the bright light. Arhan's father was still driving his bloody forehead into the wood, completely consumed by his despair. His mother stepped into the room, scattering the dropped books and papers. The father froze, his breath ragged and face covered in gore. She wrapped her arms around his trembling back and whispered, Stop suffering alone, dear. At least until the end. I'll be with you. Together, they stood in the silence of the room, their shadows stretching long as they awaited their final moments as one. Far away, the horse carriage rattled violently down the dirt path in the dark. The butler kept his eyes on the road, his voice heavy with sorrow. Young master, I know this is incredibly painful and devastating, but you must endure. That man is a calamity. The horse's hooves pounded against the earth like thunder as he continued. He is a natural disaster that humans like us cannot possibly overcome. You must accept this tragedy for what it is. The butler tightened his grip on the leather reins. "And forget it if you want to go on living. The lord and lady surely would have wanted you to." Suddenly, Arhan leapt from the back of the moving cart, prompting the butler to cry out in shock. "So you can live on? Why, young master?" Rolling onto his feet, Arhan unslung a crossbow and darted back into the woods, thinking, "No matter how I think about it, I can't leave on my own. How could I just leave my parents behind like this?" he thought, his face filled with fierce determination. "I can't just run away by myself," he resolved, sprinting against the wind. He rationalized to himself, "They call him a calamity, but the swordmaster is still just a man." He prepared the crossbow mechanism as he ran, thinking, "Like us, he is a man who will die if an arrow pierces his heart. I spent the last month preparing a deadly poison. If I can just shoot him with this, I can protect them," Arhan believed, bursting from the tree line toward the mansion under a blood-red sky. But as he looked up, his momentum completely vanished, replaced by an immobilizing dread. A tall wooden pike stood erected in the courtyard. Arhan's pupil shrank, his mind shattering at the sight. There, mounted upon the spike, was his father's severed head, completely drained of life. Blood dripped down the pole, pooling at the base beneath the torn caravan flag. Standing triumphantly before the mansion doors was the swordmaster, his mother's lifeless body discarded at his feet as he muttered, "How foolish." The white-haired killer turned to face the trembling boy. "Have you come to embrace death after all? I showed you mercy, yet." Arhan's gaze fell to his mother. Her face, which had smiled at him so warmly just moments ago, was now pale and streaked with blood. A primal scream ripped from Arhan's throat as he aimed the loaded crossbow directly at the monster, yelling, "I'll kill you." He screamed, "Die!" but the swordmaster's eye flared with a sinister red light. In the blink of an eye, the man closed the distance, swatting the crossbow away and sending Arhan violently to the ground. The difference in power was absolute. Arhan was helpless beneath the twilight sky. His weapon lay broken in the dirt, entirely useless. Arhan fell to his knees, coughing violently from the impact. He clutched his throat, gasping for air as tears streamed down his face. Gah. The swordmaster looked down at him, his blade catching the crimson light of the setting sun, and noted, "You're not even 18 yet." Sheathing his sword, he turned his back and warned, "Consider yourself lucky. I won't take your life today. Go and drown in your despair. Not a single trace of caravans can remain on this continent, and if you dare to continue that bloodline, I will find you again. Caravan should simply disappear like this." With those final words, he left Arhan utterly alone with the corpses of his family. Arhan could only stare at the blood-soaked ground, completely broken and empty. "Pathetic," an inner voice whispered. He pulled his mother's cold body into his arms, weeping uncontrollably. So utterly pathetic. He choked out a heavy "ugh," clutching her tightly as if he could pour his life into hers. His anguished wails echoed endlessly into the night, the only sound left in the ruined estate. Suddenly, a strange inner monologue resonated, saying, "Well." A brilliant blue light erupted from a legendary blade, pulsating with mysterious energy. "Or so I thought." The words echo in Arhan's mind, heavy and cold as the dirt he once moved. "A year has passed since I buried them all in one corner of the estate. Under the pale, quiet light of a full moon, the grand estate sits in deathly silence. In that time, I prepared for my revenge." Flashes of the massacre violently interrupt his thoughts. Blood splattered across the elegant walls of his home. The man who caused this was the Pinnacle, currently hailed as the strongest sword on the continent, a guardian who protects the kingdom's peace. Arhan glares at his frantically scribbled notes, the irony making his blood boil. A righteous sentinel who eradicates evil, a superhuman with the most brilliant talent, even among swordmasters. His mind spirals. Everything was a question. He stares down at the scattered papers on his desk. Why did he kill my family? Who is behind all of this? In the dim solitude of his study, the answers feel further away than ever. The emptiness of the room mirrors the void in his chest. He looks out towards the makeshift wooden crosses piercing the earth. However, one thing is clear. As the sun rises over the graves, casting long shadows over the tragic resting place, Arhan hardens his heart. The lives of all the caravan members who died in vain will never return. Suddenly, a blinding, unnatural light pierces the shadows of the grand hall. Arhan stands frozen before it. Has his grief finally driven him to madness? His eyes widen in absolute shock, his breath catching in his throat as the impossible unfolds before him. From the ethereal glow, a massive spectral sword materializes, humming with an ancient, pulsating power. A towering phantom steps out of the light, standing directly before the towering portrait of the family's founder. A voice, deep and resonant as thunder, booms through the hall. "Arhan Karavan, show some respect." The spectral figure reveals himself, a scarred, hardened old warrior with a fierce, unwavering gaze. My descendant. The ghost floats ominously above the trembling boy, radiating an aura that commands absolute submission. Arhan's mind races, struggling to process the myth standing before him. But there he was, my ancestor from the legends and the portrait. Outside, heavy rain begins to pour against the glass, perfectly matching the storm within Arhan's mind. I've heard of something like this before, he thinks. For some reason, those who have suffered severe mental shock. He clenches his hand into a tight fist, his body trembling. Sweat beads down his face, often experience hallucinations. He grits his teeth. However, I can't just simply dismiss what's in front of me. The spectral ancestor peers down at him, sensing the turmoil. I sense you're wavering. The phantom leans in closer, his sharp eyes piercing through the boy's doubts. Are you afraid you've truly gone mad? Or is it that an ancestor you dismissed as fantasy has appeared before you, leaving you utterly stunned? Stealing his nerves, Arhan looks up at the towering spirit. If this situation isn't an illusion but reality, are you truly the founder of our family? The old warrior's expression remains stern but proud. The strongest swordmaster in history, Liam Karavan, that is. Arhan's awe quickly twists into a burning, venomous frustration. If you're really the person from my father's heroic tales, then why are you only appearing before me now? The boy's sorrow finally erupts. Why now? He screams, his voice cracking violently under the weight of his trauma. Tears prick his furiously glowing eyes. After all this time, Liam watches him calmly, unbothered by the outburst. He stands with his arms crossed, waiting for the echo of the boy's scream to fade. When silence returns to the hall, Liam speaks. Because I needed to test you for myself. You see, revenge is an ordeal that shouldn't even be started unless you're prepared to give up everything. And so, for the past year, I have been watching you every single day. The memory of the battered wooden training post flashes. Despite your pathetic, hopeless talent, which you yourself must recognize. Flashbacks of Arhan's grueling, blood-sweating training fill the air. Your obsession to never let go of your sword, not even for a single day. Arhan swings his blade, his eyes glowing with feral intensity. And never, not even for a moment, has your will wavered. Liam's spirit form hovers before the broken boy. You asked why I've only appeared now. The answer to that is simple. Liam's face darkens, a terrible, ancient power brewing in his glowing eye. Because the hatred in your eyes has finally reached the depth I desired. And also because my own patience has reached its limit. The room trembles under a crushing, blood-red aura of rage. The murderous intent within me wants to tear the one. The silhouette of the ancestor looks like a demon of vengeance rising from hell, who brutally slaughtered my descendants and the people of my land to pieces. The bloodlust slightly fades as Liam states a cold, hard fact. Throughout the history of this continent, there is a fact that has never been disproven. Only a swordmaster can kill a swordmaster. He reaches out a spectral hand towards Arhan. You know this as well, which is why you swing your sword with such stubbornness, vowing revenge, no doubt. Arhan stares at his own calloused hands, feeling hopelessly small against reality. But if you're on your own, you could train for a lifetime and never reach him. The vast, starry sky stretches out above, reflecting the insurmountable peak of their enemy. A swordmaster is a transcendent existence beyond the limits of humanity, a level of skill that even so-called geniuses can never hope to reach. A lone figure stands beneath the heavens, and even among swordmasters, that man is a transcendent being who stands far above the rest. Even in my time, during the Age of War, there were only a handful of warriors as skilled as him. No one in this generation can kill him, and as time passes, he will. Arhan's pupils shrink as absolute, suffocating despair washes over him. His eye twitches, bloodshot and manic. I know full well how vast the gap between us is, but you're saying that it's beyond difficult, that it's impossible, so I just have to stand by and watch the bastard. Who took everything from me become a hero? Arhan grabs his own throat, suffocating under the crushing weight of his weakness. I'm once again powerless. A strong, guiding voice cuts through the darkness. But from this moment on, things will be different, Liam declares. The phantom stands tall, the proud caravan wolf crest shining brilliantly behind him. Because I am going to help you, so that you can become a sharper and stronger blade than him. Liam's fierce blue eyes lock onto Arhan's desperate gaze. And, as a member of Caravan, you can judge that murderer. There is only one path. A heavy, shimmering spectral sword rests embedded against the stone wall, that a Caravan can take. Liam crosses his arms, issuing a command that defies all logic. Eat my sword, descendant of the steel-blooded. Arhan stares at him, utterly dumbfounded. Deep within the estate's hidden underground forge, rows of sharp weapons line the stone walls. The roaring flames of the massive furnace dance wildly, throwing harsh heat into the room. A thick steel blade is thrust deep into the blazing inferno. The cavernous forge echoes with Liam's voice. The Karavan bloodline is a mix of human and dwarven blood. Sweating profusely, Arhan listens in silence, his exhausted face bathed in the fierce orange light. He grips the tongs firmly, holding the glowing hot sword over the fire. Liam's spirit stands over his shoulder, a ghostly mentor guiding his descendants' hands. It all began with me, a half-dwarf. The physical traits of the dwarves may not be apparent, but within their blood is a special ability that is passed down to our descendants. That ability is the power to consume swords. By doing so, you make the memories and skills of the wielder your own. This is how the Karavan family has produced swordmasters for generation after generation. Arhan closes his eyes, trying to digest this insane revelation. The source of our power that made us such a great family, inheriting power by eating swords. His inner thoughts spiral in disbelief. It's well known that dwarves are friends of iron and fire, but I've never heard of such a bizarre ability. He grips the hilt of the heated blade and pulls it from the flames. It all seems so absurd. These stories only confuse me. However, the truth can only be proven by results. Steeling his resolve, Arhan gazes intensely at the glowing steel. His eyes are wide, desperate, and filled with a terrifying determination. I don't have the luxury to hesitate. Tell me how to consume the sword. The method is simple, Liam instructs. Just heat the sword until the blade is soft enough. The metal radiates an unbearable heat, glowing brighter than the sun. Arhan brings the searing edge dangerously close to his face, and then swallow it. Smoke rises as the heat scorches the air and his skin. Maybe I'm trapped in a nightmare, or I've gone mad. Maybe I'm being led astray by a mere phantom. But even so, his face contorts into a savage snarl, casting away all fear. If there's even a sliver of a chance. I'll do it. Without a second thought, Arhan opens his mouth and bites down ferociously on the molten steel. The pain is instantaneous and absolute. Fire erupts from his mouth as the white-hot metal slides down his throat, searing his insides in a symphony of agony. He throws his head back, screaming into the forge. Aggghhhh. His silhouette is entirely engulfed in a blinding pillar of fire as the sword's raw power violently assimilates into his body. The empty hilt clatters loudly to the stone floor, the glowing blade completely consumed. Arhan's body arches backward violently, a terrifying light bursting from his chest and mouth as the unnatural digestion begins. Unable to bear the sheer torment, he collapses onto the rocky floor, his body smoking, glowing, and convulsing uncontrollably. He gasps for air, clawing desperately at his own chest as the demonic heat tries to melt him from within. A single tear of sheer agony tracks down his face. But amidst the bloodshot veins and suffocating pain, his eye burns with an unyielding, monstrous will to survive. The morning sun bathes the quiet estate, the serene chirping of birds standing in stark contrast to the grueling night before. Inside, Arhan jolts awake with a violent gasp. He collapses to his knees, his entire body trembling as he struggles to process the fact that he's still breathing. His chest heaves in the dim light as he stammers out in disbelief. I'm alive. Frantically checking his arms, he realizes the miraculous truth. I'm not just alive, I don't have a single wound. He vividly recalls the agonizing pain of chewing and swallowing the blade, briefly wondering if yesterday was all a dream, until his eyes land on the remaining hilt glowing softly on the stone floor. Suddenly, a deep, ethereal voice echoes through the room. At least your mental fortitude is commendable. Arhan flinches, his eyes widening in shock. Before him floats the imposing spectral figure of the progenitor. Unlike your hopelessly weak body, even among your ancestors, some couldn't withstand the searing pain, and more than a few gave up, the old master states. Do you believe my story now? All the legends about the caravan your father told you are true, and I am no mere hallucination of yours. Overwhelmed by the crushing aura, Arhan bows deeply. I, Arhan Karavan. Greet the progenitor. Arhan remains kneeled in absolute reverence before the towering ghost of his legendary ancestor. The apparition looks down at him with a commanding presence. Call me master, young descendant. A faint, approving smile crosses the master's weathered face. All those who have received my teachings have done so. Arhan bows his head further, pledging his obedience. I understand, master. Hope flickers in Arhan's eyes as he asks, does this mean that, like my father said, I've inherited your great power, master? He recalls his father's words and the master's promise from the night before about gaining strength by consuming swords. However, I don't feel like much has changed. Hearing this, the master flinches. The mighty ghost coughs awkwardly into his fist, losing a bit of his intimidating edge. About that, there's been a bit of a problem. To be precise, it's a problem on your part, not mine. Arhan stares blankly at the specter. Sorry, what do you mean? The master sighs. My original plan was to have you eat my beloved sword and raise you to the level of a swordmaster. However, perhaps it's because my blood has thinned over the generations. He gazes down at the broken hilt on the floor. While you still inherited the ability to consume swords, the ability to digest a sword's power contained within seems to have weakened considerably. The master conjures a visual representation of his overwhelming magical energy. To put it simply, in your current state, it's impossible for you to fully digest the essence of my sword. Arhan watches the swirling vortex of power, his face falling in disappointment. After a brief moment of silence, Arhan accepts his harsh reality. I see. If you say that's the case, Master, then it must be true. The Master looks down at him, raising an eyebrow. Is that all you have to say? A small, remarkably composed smile touches Arhan's lips. I was already aware of my body's weakness, although I'm disappointed with the result. I'm simply grateful that another path remains for me. Intrigued by the boy's resilience, the Master asks, What do you mean? Arhan looks up, his eyes gleaming with sudden realization. You said it was impossible in my current state, meaning that someday I'll be able to handle your power. In other words, I should start with a sword I can handle. Doesn't that mean I only need to find one? The ghost's eyes crinkle as he breaks into a wide, proud smirk. You already have the intuition of a swordmaster. The master begins to levitate away, gesturing for Arhan to follow. The more worn out and handled the sword, the better. Arhan takes the master's advice to heart. The scene transitions to a sprawling, desolate junkyard beneath a blood-red sky filled with mountains of discarded weapons. Guide me to an area where old, shabby weapons are abundant. They walk together through the endless valley of forgotten steel and ruin. I will pick one out for you, the master offers. Looking around at the eerie wreckage, Arhan mutters, This place is gloomy. I bet the necromancers would love it. The master observes the sprawling ruins. All the old things from the slums are gathered here. Arhan's boots step firmly over the dusty debris. From worthless scrap metal to unusable weapons. There is no more suitable place than this to seek a sword that meets your conditions, master. The old ghost nods in agreement. It's a good start. As they wander deeper into the sea of blades, memories resurface for the master. In the beginning, I, too, used to devour swords in places where the smell of blood was thick. Swords clutched by dead soldiers, axes caked in mud and blood, spears with broken shafts rolling on the ground, and so on. With all my might, I ate and ate, all to grow stronger and thus survive. Arhan listens to his master's past with rapt attention. The master gazes off into the distance, his glowing blue eyes lost in a sense of dark nostalgia. Somehow, this place reminds me of those times. He vividly recalls the endless warfare of his era. To guard the sparks of life, we clashed without end while increasingly getting fractured. Some died the same day, others lived to see tomorrow. Those days themselves were a battlefield. In the midst of those struggles, countless lives are inevitably extinguished without a trace. And yet, a select few leave behind a dazzling single point of light. Amidst the mountainous ruins, a radiant golden pillar of energy suddenly erupts from a buried weapon. The master's eyes lock onto the aura, a fiery intensity returning to his face. I've found it. He points definitively towards the glowing relic. Take that one, my young descendant. Revealed from the rubble is a simple, unadorned iron rod with a ribbed hilt. That is the one you must devour, your second sword. Time passes as Arhan hones his new abilities. 1 month later. Under the cover of night, a group of armed bandits approaches a grand, seemingly deserted mansion. It's fine. Just like we heard, this place is abandoned. There's not a single presence here, not even in the village. They creep quietly through the moonlit halls. Maybe a warlock used this mansion to experiment on living beings before, one whispers nervously. Another scoffs. Nah, I doubt it. If that were the case, we would have died the moment we stepped foot in this place. It's probably a fallen noble hiding out here. The intruders confidently stride into the main lobby, casting long shadows across the pristine tiled floor, fully intent on looting the place. One bandit eyes a polished silver pitcher sitting on an ornate desk. Doesn't it reek of the smell of the rich? The burly, bare-chested leader kicks back on a luxurious sofa, laughing heartily. Kek, our luck's finally turned. This job's gonna be a piece of cake. If there isn't even a caretaker, then that says it all. Another thief rummages through a nearby chest, suddenly pausing. Huh. He grins widely, holding up his findings. Looks like a noble's daughter really does live here. He tightly grips a handful of fine fabric. There's a whole pile of fine ladies' clothes, freshly laundered. The leader's eyes light up with predatory interest. What? For real? The thief buries his face in the silk dress, inhaling deeply with a creepy smile. The scent on these clothes really is different. The leader licks his lips, a vile grin spreading across his face. Kek, if we play our cards right, we might also be able to have another kind of fun. Hey, give it here. Let me get a sniff of that noble lady's scent, too. As they wrestle over the garments, a cold, authoritative voice pierces the room. Stop! The bandits freeze, startled. Slow, deliberate footsteps echo as a slender silhouette steps out from the darkness of the doorway. My mother liked things to be tidy. Arhan emerges, his face obscured by the heavy shadows, exuding a sudden, menacing aura. She truly hated it when her belongings were a mess. So quietly put that down. He glares at the intruders, his glowing blue eye piercing through the darkness with icy, unforgiving light. And let's have a conversation. The bandits blink in confusion, sizing him up. Who's this kid? Is he the son of the mansion's owner? The leader clicks his tongue in sheer disappointment. Tusk, so it's not a woman. Arhan rests his hand calmly near his hip, standing his ground. Did you come here to seek food or simply a place to stay? If it's one of the two, say it. His piercing gaze remains deadlocked on the armed men. I'm willing to accept you as guests if it's for one of those reasons. The bandit leader's face contorts with rage at the boy's sheer audacity. What are you yapping about, brat? Have you lost your mind? He draws a heavy club, stepping aggressively toward Arhan. You damn nobles must not have common sense. You should have just stayed hidden quietly. Why the hell did you crawl out and make a fuss? Arhan watches him approach, utterly unfazed by the threat. He slowly closes his eyes, letting out a quiet breath as he accepts the inevitable bloodshed. The massive bandit swings his weapon down with a furious roar, veins bulging in his neck. Are you that eager to die? Arhan's eye snaps open, the tranquil blue now replaced by a terrifying, demonic fire. In a flash of blinding speed, Arhan sidesteps the massive swing and drives a devastating, blood-spattering counterattack right into the bandit's abdomen, silencing his roar instantly. The intense crackling of the furnace fills the dimly lit forge. A young boy stands before the roaring flames, the heat washing over his face. He looks back at the spectral figure beside him and calls out, Master. He holds up a bizarre, impossibly thin weapon. Is this really the sword I'm supposed to eat? He asks, skepticism laced in his voice as the ghostly elder watches over him. The boy examines the gleaming steel. This is less of a sword and more like a needle, he notes. It feels like this would just snap if I tried to cut something with it, don't you think? He points out. The spirit floats forward, completely unfazed, and replies, That's to be expected. The ghostly master's voice echoes with solemn authority. It was never meant for slashing your foes, he explains. The boy's eyes widen slightly in realization, hanging onto every word. Nor is it for crushing them, the spirit continues. It's a weapon forged for a single purpose, the old man declares. A terrifying, split-second image flashes in the boy's mind. In a decisive battle, where life and death hang in the balance, it's meant for piercing through the enemy's vital points to end their life. In his mind's eye, a brutal thrust effortlessly pierces through a grown man's throat, sending a horrifying spurt of blood erupting into the air. The boy breaks from the vision, beads of sweat forming on his brow. It's only for thrusting, he asks. In that case, wouldn't a sturdier and more familiar, he begins to argue, but the spirit interrupts him with a knowing look. Your face says you think a spear would be better, my young descendant, the old man notes. That question is not without merit, the master admits. He clenches his fist around the needle's hilt. However, the memories dwelling within that sword are the most useful thing for your weak and fragile body. The spirit pauses, letting the weight of his next words settle. For your information. The boy's eye widens, completely unprepared for the revelation. Before the death of its previous owner, she single-handedly pierced the lives of over 2,000 enemies, the master reveals. The boy bows his head deeply in reverence towards the fire. Therefore, treat that sword with the respect it deserves and consume it with gratitude, the spirit commands. The young descendant steps forward, the firelight dancing on his leather boots. The weight of its sins may be light, the spirit narrates. The boy plunges the needle-like blade into the searing embers, the metal sizzling fiercely. But the life that dwells within is immeasurably heavy and solemn, the master finishes. Staring into the glowing furnace, the boy prepares himself. There is much for you to gain from inheriting that woman's memories, the spirit echoes in the background. And just like that, the boy's consciousness is forcefully pulled into a scorching memory of burning stone and ash. The first thing the child remembered was a burning mansion, consumed entirely by a raging inferno. A severely bandaged girl stirs in her bed. Mary, are you awake? A voice asks. When the girl, barely 10 years old, opened her eyes, many things had changed. Her parents had been reduced to ashes in the inferno, their forms unrecognizable. And when she heard that she was the only one who barely managed to survive, the child whispered softly in despair. Lying in her small bed, surrounded by solemn nuns and priests, she confessed her darkest wish. I wish I had died with them. After losing everything in an instant, the child came to live in an old orphanage, and to her absolute horror, that orphanage worshipped the goddess of fire. The day she learned it was a place that considered fire to be salvation. The child was dragged down to rock bottom once again. Staring out into the hall, she felt entirely alone. She who had lost everything to fire had to live in a place that saw fire as salvation. Looking into the mirror at her scarred, burn-marked face, her red eye glowing with trauma, she realized she still hadn't escaped the flames. And the days that followed there were horribly peaceful inside the grand, sunlit church. During prayer, the other children would gather, whispering cruel rumors as Mary covered her scarred face. I heard it's because she was cursed by the goddess, one boy muttered. The whispers grew louder and more vicious. So that face is a mark of the curse? No wonder it looks more disgusting the more I look at it. It's creepy. She's a monster. Disgusting. Horrible. Surrounded by their endless judgment, Mary could only think one thing: I want to die. Every single day, she prayed for death to come for her again. So I can escape the fire that consumed my face that day, the same fire I see every time I close my eyes, she thought, and to escape the fire of hatred that surrounds me when I open them. But that endless cycle of misery continued, until that day came, marked by the gleam of a sword under the moonlight. Under the night sky, an older man was practicing with his blade. Looking back, his swordsmanship was nothing but rough and crude, but it possessed a beauty more than enough to make her forget, even if just for a moment, the hell that filled her mind. His name was Heckle, an old swordsman and a former wandering knight who had worked at this orphanage for a long time. Normally, to an old man with such a harsh face. Mary stared up at him in absolute awe. She wouldn't have even dared to say a single word, yet she stepped out of the shadows. She approached the old knight bravely. How can I become like you, sir? She asked. She clutched her dress, her voice trembling but determined. I want to learn. Heckle looked down at the scarred girl in complete stoic silence. This won't be of much help in life, Mary, he sighed, his boots shifting in the dirt. Especially for a girl like you. A blade like this will only end up hurting you, he warned her gently. Mary desperately clawed at the bandages covering her ruined face. So please go back now, he started, but she cut him off. If I can just learn that, she pleaded. She grabbed her chest, pouring her shattered soul into her cry. No fire in this world would ever scare me again. Moved by her overwhelming resolve, Heckle tossed something through the cool night air. It struck a wooden barrel with a loud, resounding thud. Choose one here, he challenged, pointing to a barrel stuffed with various blades. If you can do so much as swing it, I will teach you. Mary stared at the heavy hilts jutting out of the wood, her eyes locking onto a specific, slender handle. Do I have to swing it? She asked quietly. Heckle crossed his arms and scoffed. If not that, then what? She reached out her small, trembling hand towards the weaponry. Instead of a heavy broadsword, she firmly gripped a thin, needle-like rapier. As long as I can fight back, she whispered. With surprising precision and speed, she drew the blade and pointed the tip directly at the old knight's throat. Her unbandaged eye gleamed with a dangerous, unwavering fire. I'll become whatever I need to be. The memory shatters, snapping back to reality with a brutal impact. First thrust, the boy screams in his mind, plunging his newly forged needle sword straight through an intruder's skull in a spray of crimson. The bodies of the attackers hit the floor. So you were intruders, he says coldly, standing over the carnage. Not guests. The remaining bandits stumble back, their faces twisting in pure terror. This? What is this? One stammers. This is a joke, right? The boy flicks the blood from his slender blade, his stance immaculate and deadly. I suppose there's no need for conversation at this point, he states. The spirit floats in the background, observing his student's lethal grace with a proud smile. For the past month, I've taught my young descendant only one thing, the master reflects. Memories of grueling physical conditioning flash by, the boy sprinting relentlessly through the dense forest until he dropped. A physical training method to run for hours without getting tired. As the boy readies his blade against the terrified bandits, the old ghost crosses his arms. I did not teach him swordsmanship at all, he reveals. After all, the boy had already inherited everything he needed from the memories of the sword. The spot where the intruder was just pierced. A place you can only reach by precisely piercing between the ribs. The lungs. The bald man gasps, blood pooling beneath him as he trembles helplessly on the cold floor. Looking down at the dying man, he realizes a chilling truth. Someone like me, with absolutely no skill or experience with a sword, could never perform such a precise thrust. A faint, ominous pink aura wraps around the hilt of his weapon. And yet, there is only one reason why it's possible. The owner of the needle I consumed a month ago. A woman's heavily scarred face overlays his own in his mind's eye. Mary's memories. The memories pull him into a sunlit forest. He sees a young Mary being patiently guided by an older man, Heckle, who taught her how to stand straight, how to hold a sword, how to fight, and even how to survive. The scene suddenly shifts to a freezing, snow-covered landscape. The biting winter wind howls through the barren branches, although it wasn't a systematically established theory. Heckle's swordsmanship contained the romance and freedom he'd gained while living as a wandering knight. And for a girl who feared fire, it was beautiful beyond compare. As Mary swings her thin blade through the harsh snow, it carries a quiet toughness. Her scarred face breaks into a bright, breathless smile in the freezing air. She called it Heckle's blade. And she loved it with all her heart. Heckle watches her practice, his gaze filled with a quiet, fatherly pride. And a few years later, the warmth of the past fades into the heavy gloom of a sick room. Heckle's violent coughs rattle his frail body as Mary sits vigil by his side. "Mary, the day will come when you must leave this place," he wheezes. He reaches out, his trembling hand grasping hers tightly for comfort. "When that day comes, please, go out into the wider world." He struggles for his final breaths, his strength completely failing him. "This is the last thing. I leave you, my final lesson." Tears stream uncontrollably down Mary's face as she listens to his fading voice. "I'm glad that you're here at the end of my journey." Mary, her tears fall softly as his grip loosens, his life slipping away into the cold. She sits utterly alone in the cold, moonlit room by his lifeless body. "Thank you for everything." "Rest in peace, Heckle." Fresh blood drips slowly from the tip of her needle-like sword. After that, just as Heckle taught her, she left the orphanage and went out into the unforgiving world. Standing fiercely amidst a pile of slaughtered foes, she confidently faces down another band of hardened fighters. And before long, she made a name for herself as a fairly well-known mercenary. She casually wipes the blood off her boot, completely unfazed, perhaps because she used a peculiar sword thin as a needle, or maybe because she was a young woman, a rarity in this line of work. To them, she was known as this. She expertly tightens her grip on the hilt of her deadly blade. The sewing gypsy. Her imposing figure looms in his mind as their combat stances seamlessly mirror each other across time. The memories violently snap back to reality. This must be the digestion that Master spoke of, he realizes, his eyes wide with a cold clarity. Her memory flowing into my mind speaks to me. At his feet, the heavily bleeding intruder begs, "Wah, I, T, J, ust, oh, once spare me." The dying man's desperate pleas echo pathetically in the dimly lit hall. "P-L-E-C." The protagonist twirls his needle effortlessly. With a sickening squelch, he violently drives the blade deep into the man's chest. "Please," the man gurgles his final word. "Put an end to it cleanly." Mary's hardened instinct guides his blood-soaked hand. He sharply pulls the blade free and kneels over the fresh corpse. "This is my first kill." His glowing blue eyes reflect a chilling, unnatural indifference. "However, despite it being the first time, I feel no emotion at all." He stands tall in the eerie silence, his gaze sweeping over the grim scene before him. "All I can see is what remains before me, this situation. Just now, I was able to find an opening because that man underestimated me," he thinks, remembering the man's terrified final scream. "But now, since I'm outnumbered, I can't expect the same luck as before." His eyes fiercely narrow as he calculates his next move. They must know that as well. But why? The thugs stand completely frozen, sweat pouring down their faces as they hesitate to attack. Why aren't they charging at me when they have an advantage in numbers? The ghostly apparition of his master appears behind him, observing the tense standoff with a knowing smile. "They're terrified. And for good reason, too," his master explains calmly. "The movements you just showed weren't something a beginner would do. A moderate amount of fear helps one survive, but excessive fear clouds one's judgment. It makes the enemy before them seem larger than they really are and tricks them into thinking they are a much more powerful being." The thugs back away in sheer panic. Right now, in their eyes, you are probably a murderous fiend skilled with the sword. Its very embodiment. He stands bathed in an oppressive, bloody aura, striking pure terror deep into their hearts. He smirks, his eyes glinting dangerously in the dark. "Is that so in that case?" He explosively kicks off the ground. He launches himself forward, becoming a terrifying blur of motion as he closes the distance to the mercenaries in an instant. "Now is the time," he thinks as he charges. The enemies panic wildly. Don't come any closer," one screams, desperately swinging his club. "I'll kill you. This damned bastard." He sidesteps with fluid grace, his blade a flash of silver as an enemy's eye widens in sheer, unadulterated horror. A gruesome spray of blood erupts as he cleanly pierces an enemy's neck from behind, moving far faster than they can ever react. Warm blood splatters across his cheek, but his glowing eye remains absolutely focused. Heckle said, He effortlessly slides under a desperate, sweeping polearm attack. As a woman not born with brute strength or stamina, time would never be on her side. He ducks incredibly low, perfectly anticipating the frantic follow-up swing. Therefore, on the first, or at the second attack at the latest, you must. He parries perfectly, violently turning the enemy's own momentum against him as he sweeps his thin blade upward. The mercenary's eyes bulge as the devastating strike lands. Gwaag! A blood-curdling scream rips through the air as the needle pierces straight through the man's arm. Pierce the enemy. The past and present blur seamlessly as Mary's teachings flow rapidly through his veins. Don't try to fill what you don't have, but make the ones you do have shine. A massive brute roars in fury, swinging a heavy broadsword with terrifying, crushing force. Mary effortlessly bends backward, beautifully dodging the deadly arc. My strength is my natural flexibility, a body like a dancer's. Yes, a boot firmly plants itself onto the enemy's vulnerable body. From any posture, the brute's eye twitches in absolute shock. From any angle, using the massive enemy as a mere foothold, Mary launches herself into a graceful, one-handed acrobatic flip, dodging another strike effortlessly. She descends like an apex predator, her eyes glowing with lethal intent as the enemy looks up in total despair. I can aim for the enemy's life. With a final, furious roar, a devastating strike pierces down, ending the intense fight in a gruesome geyser of blood. Silver moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of the night forest, casting a serene yet haunting glow as the wind rustled the leaves overhead. Beneath that pale moon, the boy tirelessly swung his shovel, carving a deep hole into the cold earth while his master's ethereal spirit watched in solemn silence. The master's ghostly form drifted closer, his voice cutting through the quiet night. Now will you cast away your doubt? The boy collapsed to the dirt, panting heavily as an ant crawled near his eye. Yet, as he remembered his brutal victory over the thugs, his master's wisdom echoed in his mind. If you have the stamina to swing a sword all day without losing your breath, then 4 untrained thugs are opponents you can easily handle alone. A proud, knowing smile touched the old ghost's lips, and that a caravan amidst a life-or-death battle only grows stronger. The boy stared down at his trembling hands, the lingering adrenaline mixing with profound realization. Everything my master said was true. Memories of his past battles flashed before his eyes. He recalled his body becoming as flexible as a dancer's, guided by the echoes of Mary's fierce will. And now I understand a little, he thought, feeling the heavy burden of her legacy. What it was like for her to fight against the world. Is this what my master spoke of? He realized that understanding his enemy was the key to this mysterious strength, the power of digestion. My young descendant, the master proclaimed gently. When it comes to the sword, I never lie. The old man's expression then turned dead serious, the air growing thick with tension. And I promise you this, your days ahead will be painful, a series of trials where you'd rather be dead. The warning hung heavy in the air, painted with the promise of blood and agony. So much that you will feel like the hardship you face today is a blessing. Standing alone in the moonlit clearing, the boy faced the spirit of his ancestor. Even after hearing that, will you still walk down this path? The master challenged. The boy's fists clenched tightly at his sides. If it means I can point my sword at that man Carlos's throat. A fierce fire ignited in his eyes, obliterating any trace of hesitation. I will walk down it, no matter the path, master. But the very next moment, his bold resolve shattered into pure, unadulterated panic, sweat beading on his forehead. Master. The scene abruptly shifted to blinding daylight. The boy hung desperately to a rocky surface, panting heavily as his master floated above him in the clear sky. Is this path truly? He was free climbing a massive, vertical cliff face with absolutely zero safety equipment. The right way. High above the clouds, a solitary tree marked the peak of the impossibly tall mountain, while the boy clung like a tiny ant to its sheer, crumbling face, dodging falling rocks. Peering down at the dizzying, deadly drop beneath him, the boy whimpered into the howling wind. Really? Sweat poured down his face as he struggled to find a grip. The master floated casually beside him, clicking his tongue in mild disappointment. Tusk, where did the look in your eyes from last night go? Has your doubt returned? The spirit sat cross-legged in midair, entirely unbothered by the altitude. Then again, that's one of your strengths. You've always been that way since you were young. The boy gritted his teeth, barely holding on as his master mused. We'll need to work on that trait of yours at some point. But first, the master continued, shifting his tone, I'll answer your question. The path of a swordsman is broadly divided into 5 stages. As the boy climbed, the master lectured. At the beginning of the path, the sword beginner. Among them, those with talent reach the realm of sword walker. He He spoke of the higher realms, the sword runner who commands the battlefield, the sword expert who turns the tide of war alone, and reigning above all other swordsmen, a being revered as a god itself. Visions of heavily armored knights, bowing in absolute reverence, filled the boy's mind. A blinding pillar of light pierced the heavens, representing the absolute zenith of martial prowess. The state of achieving the mind sword, a swordmaster, the old man declared, the very title exuding immense power. Answer me, young descendant. The master looked down at his struggling pupil. Among these, where do you think you belong? The boy let out a breathless, strained laugh. I'm sure you want a bold answer, but I know my own level well. He recalled the fundamental rule. To become a swordmaster, one must wield mana by forming a mana heart. But I haven't formed a mana heart yet, so I believe I don't even qualify as a beginner. The master nodded slowly. You're very self-aware. The old man offered a wide, almost terrifying grin. Yes, you haven't even entered the path of the sword yet. You're a novice among novices. The boy's trembling fingers threatened to slip from the unforgiving rock. This training is to guide a novice like you onto the path of a beginner, so that you can form a mana heart. The boy froze, his eyes widening in pure disbelief. What? Why, you mean I'm going through all this risk right now, just so I could form a mana heart? He screamed, his voice echoing off the deadly drop. In a place like this where I could actually die? Normally, people drank expensive potions or received guidance from high-level knights in safe academies. So why did we go out on a limb? Why do we have to stick to this method? Frustration and exhaustion etched deep into his features as he bit his lip, pressing his face against the cold stone. I just don't understand. The master crossed his arms, his demeanor calm and completely unyielding. Yes, well, it is as you say. The formation of a mana heart itself is not a difficult task. It wouldn't be impossible to just follow the norms. However, the master's voice deepened, resonating with ancient pride. The blood of us caravans are imbued with the unyielding power of steel. Therefore, to wield that mighty power, an equally tough vessel is needed. An ethereal blue aura flared fiercely around the master, his eyes glowing with authority. If you truly wish to reach the level of a swordmaster, there is only one thing you must have. Something that wouldn't be scratched even if it clashed with the world. A heart of steel, and there is only one way to forge it. The boy hung on the precipice, the sheer drop below him a constant, looming threat. To make your body feel the need of a mana heart on its own, the master instructed grimly, you must endlessly push yourself to the brink of death. The image of a battered, bloodied knight falling to their knees flashed in the boy's mind. Even among my descendants, very few have completed this training to the end. That's how painful and terrible the process is. However, those who endured it all the way to the end, a brilliant meteor shower painted the night sky in his vision, symbolizing their glorious ascension, became swordmasters. The master looked down at the boy, clinging desperately to the stone wall. How about it, young descendant? Are you feeling a little motivated? With a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline, the boy's hand slammed firmly onto the rock ledge above. He hoisted himself up, a fierce, defiant grin breaking across his exhausted face. More than a little. The master beamed with pride, seeing the true, unbreakable spirit of a caravan awaken within his pupil. I do not lie when it comes to the sword, descendant. The boy's eyes burned with a newfound, terrifying ambition. The mana heart you will create will be different. Sunlight broke brilliantly over the jagged cliff edge, illuminating his path forward, different from anyone else in this world. Time passed, and the bright sun gave way to a luminous, full moon hanging peacefully amidst the midnight clouds. Far from the deadly mountain, nestled in the Verde region, lay the eastern village of Campbell. Its quiet streets were bathed in the cool night air. Inside a dimly lit, bustling tavern, gossip flowed as freely as the cheap ale. Hey, did you hear that rumor about the village to the west, Caravan? A patron leaned in, his voice dropping to a hushed whisper. Oh, you mean that place where no one's been seen for a year? Why ask about that creepy town? His companion replied. Well, a rumor's been going around lately. There's something in that western village. Nervous whispers filled the tavern air. Others say necromancers experimenting with magic are stationed there. There are all sorts of things being said, but they all come to one conclusion. If you don't want to die, don't enter the western village. In the corner of the room, listening intently to every word, sat a lone figure. Shrouded in a heavy, tattered cloak, their face was completely obscured by pitch-black shadows as they silently sipped from a cup. The mysterious figure slowly lowered their drink, setting the cup down on the wooden table with a sharp, ominous clack. A village where you'll die if you enter. Since that day, I started to hold on to the cliff with only my left hand, he recounted, his solitary figure bathed in the harsh sunlight as he scaled the sheer rock face. I dealt with the uninvited guests at the mansion at the same time, even on days when I was completely drained. he continued, flashing back to a deadly encounter with assassins. Amidst the terrible muscle pain from physical training, even on days when it was a struggle to just lift his arm, he pushed forward. "I went through all of it without missing a single day," he stated with fierce determination. His bruised fingers dug into the jagged stone, sweat trailing down his battered skin as he pulled his body upward. Despite the grueling regimen, he admitted a harsh truth into the dark woods. "If you're asking whether I managed to form a mana heart through that absurd training," he muttered. He slumped heavily against the rough bark of a tree, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. "Unfortunately, I did not," he confessed, looking utterly exhausted. He raised his trembling hand, staring at the physical toll of his relentless, agonizing efforts. But then the disappointment melted away, replaced by a sharp, knowing smirk. "However," he whispered, a spark igniting in his eyes. "A change is clearly taking place," he realized with newfound confidence. The memory of combat flashed in his mind, with the terrifying swing of a massive iron weapon whistling through the air. "One of those changes is," he recalled. He leaned back effortlessly, dodging a deadly swipe. "My senses have become incredibly sharp," he noted, dancing around his enemy with fluid grace. The bandit roared in fury, swinging his chained weapon with murderous intent. "But it's not just my 5 senses, including sight and hearing," he observed, as the heavy spiked ball crashed harmlessly beside him. "But also my judgment and concentration in dealing with situations," he added. He analyzed every opening, sidestepping the brute's wild onslaught with calculated precision. He swayed backward, the sharp edge of a blade grazing past his face by a mere fraction of an inch. "To the point where it's incomparable to what it was before," he explained, gliding across the floor to lock onto his target. "And every time I wield the needle, when I focus on a single point," he narrated as his eyes gleamed with absolute clarity. The enemy lunged forward, his face contorted in a scream of rage. "For just a brief moment," the young man observed calmly. He ducked swiftly beneath a sweeping chain, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. A brilliant light flared within his striking blue eyes as he raised his weapon. It felt like time, except for me, he realized. The world around him seemingly froze as he slid effortlessly under the enemy's guard. "Had stopped," he concluded. A sharp pierce echoed through the hall, and blood sprayed like crimson jewels in the air as his precise strike landed perfectly. His cold, focused gaze tracked the droplets of blood, his expression entirely unbothered by the violence. The enemy's eyes widened in sheer terror and agony as multiple precise strikes pierced his defenses in rapid succession. He followed through with blinding speed, a streak of silver cutting through the darkness. "The me before the change," he reflected. He stood victorious, his profile illuminated by a pale, ethereal light. "Is just one thing," he murmured. "The fact that I can now," he began, his voice trailing off. A soft breath escaped his lips, a chilling mist seeping into the night air as a subtle smile formed. In his mind's eye, the needle stood solitary and magnificent, gleaming brightly as a testament to his refined technique. It stood proudly amongst a graveyard of ordinary swords, thrumming with a sharp, resonant power. Back in the quiet forest, the ghostly figure of his ancestor floated above him. "To have achieved this when I haven't even formed a mana heart or become a sword beginner," the young man pondered out loud. He closed his eyes, contemplating his rapid growth. "Of course, this is likely possible thanks to the power of the needle, but it's still an astonishing fact," he admitted. He looked up at his ancestor and asked, "Master, just what kind of power will I possess when I reach the next level?" The old ghost grinned, stroking his beard as he mocked. "To be impressed by something so trivial, you still have a long way to go before you're no longer a novice." The ancestor's gaze hardened as he began to explain. "I will answer your question," he said. "Once you form a mana heart, become a sword beginner, and understand the depths of that power. Only then will you and the owner of the needle be on equal footing," the master revealed. "And if you take one more step forward," he continued. A brilliant pillar of light erupted in a vision of a majestic knight. "Through the path emitted from the mana heart, you'll be able to enhance your physical abilities and construct a domain for offense and defense, reaching the realm of superhumans," the master declared. "The world calls that level a sword walker, although it's the very next stage after a beginner," he warned. The master's spectral eyes bore into him intensely. "You will realize how vast the difference is between the two the moment you face it," he finished ominously. "Does that answer your question?" the ancestor asked, hovering in the misty woods. The young man nodded solemnly and replied, "I understand." His blue eyes narrowed with intense focus as he looked up again. "In that case, may I ask one more thing?" he inquired. "If what I'm sensing is correct," he started, his voice tinged with unease. He envisioned the terrifying aura of a solitary warrior resting by a campfire amidst a ruined, fiery landscape. That man who entered the territory a while ago and has settled here is, he trailed off. Heavy boots crunched against the stone, a sword resting at the stranger's hip as embers danced in the air. A sword walker, the young man asked. The powerful stranger sat calmly, a swirling blue aura radiating from his body, his piercing eyes staring straight ahead. The ancestor nodded gravely. That's right, he confirmed. That man is on a completely different level from all the rabble you've dealt with so far. What will you do? The master challenged. In your current state, you wouldn't last a single second. The young man placed his hand flat against the cold earth. For now, I plan to observe the situation and prepare for the worst, he stated. I have no other choice after all, he sighed. The ancestor floated closer and asked, You could choose to abandon this territory so you can avoid a fight you can't win, couldn't you? The young man looked down, his expression heavy with resolve. That's not in my options, he refused flatly. Although it's been so long that it's become desolate beyond recognition, he added wistfully. He stood up, gazing out over the vast, moonlit valley where the remnants of the territory lay. It's the only place that holds everybody's memories, he declared. The ancestor watched him in silence. The young man's back stood straight, bearing the weight of his resolve against the quiet night. Grow stronger, my young descendant, the ancestor urged. The two figures, one a spectral master, the other a determined student, stood together under the vast, empty sky. The ancestor's ghostly face was filled with a stern, ancient wisdom. In this iron kingdom, only the strong have the answer, he declared. Even your simple wish is nothing but greed and a luxury for you right now, the master reminded him harshly. Dwell on and ruminate over the emotions you feel now, the master ordered. The young man clenched his fist tightly, his veins popping as he absorbed the harsh truth. Use them as the driving force to obtain what you desire, the master instructed. Feed on that trial and become as hard as steel, he commanded, as the glowing full moon cast a brilliant light over the darkened clouds. Heavy rain battered the desolate territory. The boy observed from the shadows, his thoughts consumed by the arrival of a stranger. After the mysterious man set foot in the territory, he thought. Observing him became a new part of my daily routine, he noted. The torrential downpour continued to wash over the abandoned, ruined village. He watched the stranger closely, noticing his peculiar respect for the empty ruins. What I learned in the process was clear, the boy mused. Even though the village was full of empty houses, as if he believed every single one still had an owner, he never touched even the smallest trinket. And lived a simple life with only the belongings he brought, the boy observed, noticing the man's meager possessions. If there were any other traits, it was that he would lose himself in thought while watching the sunset every day, the boy recalled. Or otherwise, he was praying. After days of silent scrutiny, a realization finally settled in the boy's mind, and the conclusion I reached was, peering cautiously from behind a rain-slicked tree, he muttered to himself, That guest seems to be a knight. His ghostly master materialized beside him, arms crossed in contemplation. I think so too, the spirit agreed. He's a swordsman who has attained the level of a sword walker, and yet he strictly adheres to rules and his manners even when no one is watching. The master's voice echoed with centuries of ancient wisdom. People that inflexible are rare to find if they weren't knights. The boy crossed his arms, considering the prospect thoughtfully. In that case, he might not be a bad first neighbor, he reasoned. Knights are, after all, those who uphold honor and pursue justice. The master's expression hardened, dismissing the boy's naive assumption. They're much better than other intruders. It's true that they pursue honor, but it's misleading to call them righteous beings, he warned. A vision of a haughty noble lounging on a throne of gold flashed in the boy's mind. You cannot say that the honor they believe in and uphold is good to everyone, the master explained. A knight's honor is defined by the one they've sworn loyalty to, the one who provides them with valuable riches. It's decided by the will of their employer. The spectral master's eyes narrowed with a piercing intensity. So let me teach you the meaning of a knight once more, he declared. A bleak battlefield materialized in the boy's vision, crows circling a bloodied blade. A knight is merely a swordsman who uses honor as a pretext to exercise violence, the master sneered. An executioner who carries out efficient killings based on sword techniques passed down for generations, and since they're clad in expensive gear, they're just enemies that are annoyingly difficult to kill. The boy absorbed the harsh truth as the master continued his lecture. Don't be blinded by the hollow ring of the word knight, the master commanded. Observe and judge the essence of the target itself. Doubt, because that is the precious talent you possess. The boy blinked, utterly bewildered. Doubt is my talent. His eyes widened as the realization struck him. You've always been like that since you were a child, the master reminisced. While you seemed to listen to the legends of Karavan that your father told you, on the inside, you endlessly delved into the truth of those stories. Memories of the boy's desperate survival surfaced in his mind. Even in situations where you might have endangered yourself by being intoxicated by the power you gained, you found the answer by eliminating variables through morbid sensitivity and observation, the master praised. The boy felt as though he was plunging into the breathless depths of his own consciousness. Doubt is a refusal to be swayed by what you simply see and hear, the master explained. It's an attitude of using every means, method, and endless thought to try and reach the truth. Those who do not know doubt can never cross their limits. Don't lose that trait of yours, the master urged, for that is your talent for the sword. Taking a deep breath, the boy steeled his resolve. Understood. He looked down, his gaze sharpening with newfound determination. I'll keep that in mind, master, he vowed. As much as I have been taught, he thought to himself. Twilight descended, painting the sky in deep shades of violet and crimson. I never let down my guard regarding the strange man, the boy recalled. After taking plenty of time to determine that he at least wouldn't turn into an intruder, I approached him slowly, very slowly. Suddenly, a blade crackling with blue mana swung out and the stranger turned around. I know you've been watching me this whole time, the man said. The boy froze in his tracks. Don't even think about running away, the knight warned. If you... The man's glowing eyes locked onto the boy with terrifying intensity. I will cut you down on the spot, he threatened. Sweat beaded down the boy's cheek as he gripped his hilt, unsheathing his own blade with a sharp scrape. In that tense moment, fragments of an absorbed memory flooded the boy's mind, the memory of a fierce red-haired mercenary. The sewing gypsy, she mused in the memory. That alias was more widely known than I thought. The flashback continued, showing men cheering for her in a tavern. Thanks to that, I received recruitment offers from well-known mercenary groups, she recalled. The scene shifted to a dark alleyway. Or conversely, I was often pestered by thugs who came after hearing rumors about me, she added, glaring at the men surrounding her. In the midst of those days, a certain thought occurred to me, she reflected. With a swift, brutal slash, she effortlessly cut through her assailants, sending blood spraying into the air. She stood victorious over a groaning thug, a wicked grin on her face. Perhaps I've gone beyond the level of a female mercenary using a peculiar sword, she thought. An arrogant, confident smile spread across her blood-spattered face, and have truly become a strong swordsman. But her pride was abruptly shattered, and the moment that made me realize it was arrogance didn't take long to come, she realized. A massive armored knight loomed over her, his eyes glowing blue. They call you the sewing gypsy, don't they? He asked coldly. The knight stared down at her with utter disdain. Indeed, a fitting nickname for such a feeble sword, he mocked. It seems you were proud of your own skills. In a flash, the knight's gauntlet clamped onto her hair, forcing her down. Don't flatter yourself, you singed stray, he spat. You're nothing but a lowly mercenary. She choked out a painful gasp. The knight towered over her, his presence suffocating. If you weren't a woman, you'd be no different from a bug that I would have killed on the spot, he bellowed. He turned his back to her. The only reason you survived today is entirely thanks to the rules of the Red Hawk Knights, he declared. The Red Hawks never takes the lives of women and children. Leaving her in the dirt, his cape billowed in the wind. So spend the rest of your life being grateful for our chivalry, he finished. She gripped her broken blade, her hand trembling violently. That day, I felt an immeasurable wall, she confessed. Snapping back to the present, the boy clutched his sword as the terrifying knight approached. Between me and that man, the wall called a knight, he thought, recalling the memory. Later, I learned the stage he reached is called Sword Walker. The boy's mind raced. Mary, in the memories I've digested, is far stronger than I am now, he realized. For her to have been defeated without even being able to lift a finger, he's coming. I can feel an overwhelming sense of death. The oppressive, bloodlust-filled aura radiating from the man was paralyzing. Vividly beyond comparison to when I was hanging from the cliff, the boy thought. He gasped for air, his vision swimming. Is that why? He wondered. He could feel the sheer, pulsing rhythm in his chest. My heart's pounding. The pressure intensified, triggering something within the boy. Is growing stronger, he noted. His eyes flared with a sudden, unnatural glow. And I can see it, he realized. The realm of a superhuman, possible only from the level of a sword walker and above. An explosive torrent of blue energy erupted around the night, illuminating the dusk. Where mana is sprayed outside the body like blood vessels, adding will to offense and defense, the boy analyzed. The boy took a defensive stance, his eyes wide in awe and terror. The sword walker's path. The knight glared at him, his voice deadly calm. What's your reason for watching me? He demanded. It seems you're the one from the rumors who attacked visitors here. If you don't have a valid reason, I'll have no choice but to consider you an enemy. Answer me. The boy held his ground. It was to distinguish whether you were a guest or an intruder, he answered. The man frowned slightly. I find that hard to understand. Be more specific, the knight commanded. The boy straightened his posture. "I'm a resident who was born and raised here," he stated firmly. He recalled the tragedy that befell his home. "However, a year ago, while I was away from the territory for a while, as if a necromancer unleashed a beast, my neighbors vanished and the village had fallen into ruin," he explained. The knight listened silently, his eyes narrowing as he took in the boy's words. "Since then, barbarians and vagrants have invaded this place, frequently threatening this village and even my life," the boy continued. The boy maintained his stern expression. "And I've dealt with them all on my own hands," he claimed. Inwardly, he thought to himself, "There's no need to tell him the whole truth." "But unlike them, you seemed distantly more powerful," the boy confessed, his sword still drawn. "Enough that I was certain I'd die if I approached you carelessly." The man's heavy boots remained planted in the earth. "That's why I've been watching you, to judge whether you're an intruder or a guest," the boy stated. "If it were the latter, I was going to invite you to be a neighbor," the boy reasoned. "Because if it were the former, I would have had to devise other plans for the territory," he admitted. The knight took a step forward, the dirt crunching under his weight. "You intended to oppose me, even knowing the difference in our skills?" the knight asked, genuinely surprised. The boy's expression remained resolute and unwavering. "This is the land that holds a lifetime of my memories," he declared fiercely. "It's too precious to simply abandon and flee." Hearing the conviction in the boy's voice, the dangerous gleam in the knight's eyes finally softened. He let out a quiet, understanding breath. "A precious place," the knight repeated softly. The suffocating tension evaporated. The knight smiled warmly, resting his massive sword on his shoulder. "The young master has indeed gone through something very difficult," he acknowledged sympathetically. "I understand." The boy lowered his stance slightly, though caution remained etched on his face. "Then it's time for me to state my position," the knight declared, "since we need to know each other's circumstances to be neighbors." The towering man looked down at the boy with an open expression. "So please lower your guard and your sword," he offered. "Then I'll also sheath my sword and tell you my story." The knight waited patiently. "Come on now," he urged gently. But the boy didn't move, his face cast in deep shadow as doubt gnawed at his mind. The terrifying voice of his master echoed inside his head once again. "There is only one way to forge a heart of steel." The phantom master's eyes glowed with ruthless ambition. "You must push yourself to the brink of death endlessly," the master demanded, "so that your body itself begins to crave a mana heart. How about it, my young descendant?" The voice boomed like thunder in the boy's mind. "Are you feeling motivated yet?" Gripping his hilt until his knuckles turned white, the boy locked eyes with the knight. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that," he said defiantly. "I can't fully trust you yet, and I need this sword for at least a little defense." The knight's friendly demeanor vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, sharp glare. "You must know that if I truly intended to harm you," the knight warned darkly, "that sword would be meaningless." The knight's face hardened with the rigid pride of a warrior. "In a situation where we've both drawn weapons, to be the first to sheath the sword would be a blemish on a knight's honor," he stated firmly. "I must uphold my honor." The boy stood his ground, defying the terrifying pressure. "I know that too, but I can't back down either," he replied. Silence fell over the desolate land as the boy remained firmly planted, ready to test his limits against an insurmountable wall. Beneath the canvas of a twilight sky, the winds whispered through the trees, setting the stage for an inevitable clash between two figures. The veteran knight narrowed his eyes, analyzing his young opponent. "What is this boy?" he pondered. "He looks delicate enough to pass for a girl, yet his entire body shows signs of enduring, grueling training." He noticed the boy's flimsy frame, offset by impeccable balance. "However, he hasn't learned proper swordsmanship," he noted, "an unorthodox style that pours everything into the first strike. Even at a generous estimate, he hasn't moved past the level of a beginner." The knight's conclusion was absolute. "In other words, he poses not even the slightest threat to me." He watched the boy standing his ground. The boy must know this himself, the knight thought, and yet, what is with those eyes? The boy's gaze burned with an unyielding, piercing blue light, a silent testament to his unbreakable resolve. Recognizing the silent challenge, the knight exhaled deeply, and a luminous blue aura spilled from his lips as his mana flared. The ambient mana converged, igniting the very tip of his steel blade with a fierce, cerulean glow. Surrounded by ribbons of surging energy, the knight readied his stance. "A half-hearted response won't do," he muttered. With explosive speed, the knight launched himself forward, closing the distance in a single, blinding streak of blue light. He descended upon the boy with immense force, swinging his blade with a precise, practiced downward arc. "I'll strike his wrist and disarm him right here," the knight calculated midair. "This is the best way to avoid injuring him." But in that fraction of a second, the boy's eye flared fiercely in the darkness. Clang, a shower of sparks erupted between them as the young boy raised his blade and impossibly met the knight's heavy strike. The knight's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. My sword was deflected, he thought in shock, by that boy who isn't even a beginner yet. The immense force sent the boy skidding backward, his boots carving deep trenches into the earth. That's not all, the knight realized. A sudden gust of wind enveloped them. In just one breath from the boy, the surrounding mana is surging like waves. A brilliant crystalline core ignited within the boy's chest. Did it form within him in that split second? The knight gasped. That abnormal mana heart. Despite this miracle, the knight remained utterly astonished. Even so, deflecting my sword should be impossible, but the boy did it. The knight regained his composure, watching the boy ready himself in the twilight. I can't be certain of anything, but one thing is clear. Mana flared wildly around the boy as he lunged forward. His sword is coming, and it contains the boy's entire being, a strike staked on his very life. Beneath the knight's awe, the boy gritted his teeth, suppressing a pained groan. His hands trembled violently around the hilt of his sword from the sheer impact. Blocking that knight's sword just now wasn't because of my skill, the boy thought to himself. Cold sweat dripped down his focused face. It was nothing more than a fluke. His mind raced, analyzing the clash as electric mana sparked around his grip. From the start, that knight had no intention of hurting me. He aimed for my wrist to avoid vital points, and the force behind it was minimal. That's the only reason it was possible. I predicted the trajectory, the boy recalled, swinging with all his might, and thrust the tip of the needle into that gap. To block his strike, their blades clashed once more, sending explosive shockwaves through the air. And the price for that miracle is steep, he winced inwardly. The recoil from the clash was devastating, an impact like colliding head-on with a speeding carriage. The boy reeled as electric pain coursed through his veins. Agony, as if every bone in my body has shattered, is ravaging my entire body. In the boy's mind's eye, the knight's presence morphed into a colossal, terrifying black wolf with glowing eyes, radiating an oppressive aura. Truly a despairing gap in power. The immense darkness threatened to swallow him whole. However, a faint, defiant smile crept across the boy's lips. Piercing blue energy erupted from his chest, pulsing with vibrant life. The thing I longed for so desperately. I've finally awakened a mana heart, the heart of steel. He stared at the intimidating wall of red aura radiating from the veteran knight. But even so, I'm still only a beginner. My thrusts will never reach him. His resolve crystallized into a single thought. Then there is only one way. I must create a path of my own. His grip tightened on the hilt, his eyes narrowing with a newfound, steely purpose. Using Mary's memories as a stepping stone, he reflected, kneeling with a small blade in hand. His mind drifted back to the past, to the woman named Mary. That day, when she collapsed before the overwhelming wall of a walker. A vivid flashback showed a trembling hand gripping the hilt of a shattered blade. As she faced an insurmountable limit head-on, Mary's face turned upward, stricken with terror. At the moment, her body trembled with fear. Underneath the blinding, unforgiving sun, a defeated Mary knelt in the dust. The first thing that came to my mind was Heckle's voice. The image shifted to the frail, bedridden form of an old man, sweating but holding on to his convictions. "Don't forget, Mary," Heckle's frail voice echoed in her memory as she held his trembling hand. "Most swordsmen see a wall and consider it an insurmountable limit, but that's merely an excuse for those who lack the courage to clash and choose to settle." Back in the present, the boy pushed through his agonizing pain, refusing to back down. "Don't look away." Flames of resolve ignited on the barren ground. "Stand tall instead." The visage of a fearsome armored knight bathed in crimson flames manifested in his vision. "And face it head-on." He held his ground firmly, his sword pointed directly at the encroaching terror of the Red Knight. With a heavy metallic crunch, the metaphorical armored knight stepped forward. A flurry of devastating, bloody strikes tore through the boy's illusionary defenses. "You'll surely be cut and torn apart miserably time and again. And you will fall to your knees in helplessness," his inner monologue continued, as crimson blood spattered across his vision. "But if you don't give up and continue to strike against it, your sword will surely—" The impenetrable armor of his inner demon began to smoke and dissolve into the blinding light. Bruised, bloodied, and battered, the boy offered a triumphant smirk. "Surpass that wall." Suddenly, a loud, resounding thump echoed loudly from his chest, signaling the true awakening of his power. A scarred hand grips a hilt tightly, trembling slightly in the dark as the narrator's voice hums with gravity. "If you've ever held a sword, if you've lived a fierce life, you will eventually face it." A solitary figure stands before a towering, unyielding blue barrier that eclipses the sky. A massive wall blocking your path. The pressure seeping deep beneath your skin. The narration continues, describing an invisible but overwhelming weight. A cold sweat beads down the young swordsman's face as his grip tightens, his wide eyes overwhelmed by the crushing sense of hopelessness. Sheer terror anchors his heavy boot to the cracked earth, making even a single step feel like an unbearable burden. His knuckles turn white around the grip of his blade. You'll want to turn your back and run away. But amidst the despair, an intense blue eye pierces the tension. And yet that boy. With a sharp, echoing crack, deep fractures begin to spiderweb across the seemingly invincible wall. The fractures multiply through the dark void as massive chunks of the barrier begin to splinter. Shards of the once solid wall explode outwards, hurtling violently through the blinding light. He intends to clash against it. The voice booms with rising anticipation. Standing tall amidst the flying debris, the blond boy holds his sword perfectly vertical, his face cast in defiant shadow. His hair whips in the wind as he reflects, resistance that's nothing more than youthful recklessness. However, that's why it's a trial that I must absolutely go through. Dust swirls over the barren, uneven ground. It doesn't have to be a perfect path, even if it's clumsy and incomplete. He pushes off the rubble with a firm step, splashing through a shallow puddle. As long as there's a possibility of reaching it, that alone is enough. His piercing blue eye glows with sharp calculation in the dark. Doubt, he commands himself, observing the imposing silhouette before him. Watch which muscles that knight puts his strength into, how he catches his breath, and what trajectory he intends to draw. He analyzes every detail, a master absorbing the enemy's stance. Gather every clue, eliminate what is unnecessary, and create it. Trails of brilliant blue energy whip around him as he faces the colossal shadow of his opponent. To reach that place, a single path. A dazzling, star-like burst of azure light ignites in the darkness, tearing through the shadows. Watching from afar, a bearded older man crosses his arms and smiles with profound pride. That's it, descendant, he praises as the blue energy flares. To advance without yielding before any adversity. That's what it means to be a caravan. The boy stands completely engulfed in a roaring pillar of blue aura. Do not be afraid to clash and shatter. Willingly throw your whole body before the trial and forge yourself. A magnificent beam of light shoots upwards, the physical manifestation of the flow of the caravan's will. An explosive shockwave ripples across the earth, throwing debris everywhere as it obliterates the ground. Driven by sheer willpower, the blond boy lunges forward with incredible speed, his eyes burning with relentless fury. Elsewhere, another battle of the mind is being fought as a red-haired girl dashes forward, her face etched with grim determination. I was afraid. The young blond boy slides backward from a devastating attack. My circumstance of being the sole survivor amidst the blazing flames, he reflects. The fact that the tragedy which took everything was merely the beginning. The horrific memories weigh heavy, times when I couldn't even face a mirror. He hunches over in pure exhaustion, shrouded in shadow as he gasps for air. Days when even breathing felt burdensome. That's how I knew. The red-haired girl grits her teeth, a fierce red glare in her eyes. That what I truly had to fear was not the fire, but my own weakness of constantly running away. The words pulse with fiery resolve. So I will. Thrust. A hand grips a hilt with white-knuckled intensity, embers dancing dangerously around the steel. The tragic memory surfaces, a quaint house entirely consumed by roaring flames, and a loved one lying motionless on the burning ground. My daily life, my family. The red-haired girl stares blankly, her spirit momentarily shattered by the trauma. My future that was taken. A lone silhouette faces a titanic inferno, staring down a world filled entirely with fire. But that despair transforms into pure, unadulterated rage as she screams, unleashing everything she has. If someone asks if I pierced through it, I only have one answer. A solitary vertical streak of golden light splits the pitch-black void. Swathed in swirling blue winds, the blond boy swings his blade with everything he has left. I collapse, the narration states bluntly. The clash is devastating as blue energy meets a raging sea of fire, and the boy is sent falling backward, completely overwhelmed. Even if I can't win, I can face it. Refusing to stay down, he throws himself back into the fray, his blade colliding violently with his opponent's. The blond boy screams in exertion, his face contorted in a desperate roar against the terrifying, unyielding gaze of the older knight. A cataclysmic explosion of energy detonates, the sheer force of the impact sending a sword spiraling uselessly into the sky. Heckle, the name echoes softly as the blade spins through the air. The scene shifts to a serene moonlit night, where the red-haired girl stands under the glowing orb, staring up into the sky, and came out into the world. She clutches a broken blade, a single needle tightly in her hand. The teachings you passed down and holding the single needle you placed in my hand. Leaning back against the cool night air, she closes her eyes in momentary peace. I've become free, just like you, yearning for a life of wandering. Suddenly her eye snaps open, sharp and deeply serious. But I'm not sure if I can truly say I lived such a life. A montage of horrors flashes by, a towering fiery rider and landscapes swarming with destruction. The world was swarming with monsters stronger than me, and there were many high walls that could never be overcome by will alone. A figure burns brightly, engulfed entirely in flames, yet refusing to turn to ash. I can say this much. Standing bravely against a colossal, monstrous warrior wielding a spiked club, the red-haired girl charges fearlessly. Until the very last moment of my life, there wasn't a single wall in my path. Gripping her blade with unparalleled ferocity, her fiery eyes lock onto her target, that I ever turned away from. Sparks drift upward into the night sky, crackling softly as the warmth of the fire pushes back the surrounding darkness. Slowly, the young master's heavy eyelid flutters open, fighting off the lingering exhaustion. Laying flat against the cold earth, he groans softly, "Ah." Pushing himself up to sit by the fading campfire, a wave of confusion washes over him. Did I lose consciousness? He notices a heavy fabric draped over him, realizing who it belongs to. This robe belongs to that night, that means. His gaze drops to the dull iron needle resting on the ground, and he sighs with a bitter edge. In the end, I failed to break through. He grips the handle of the needle tightly, frustration brewing within him. But a familiar, resonant voice breaks the silence. Do not be disheartened, young descendant. His ancestor's spirit floats down before him, radiating a proud aura. It was a struggle worthy of the caravan name. The spirit smiles warmly at the boy. Moreover, along with the painful defeat, haven't you noticed it yourself yet? You've completely digested the needle. The boy clenches his fist, instantly feeling the profound physical change. I can feel that my muscles have become incomparably more flexible than before. Also, my senses have sharpened like those of a wild beast. The overwhelming aura of the weapon's past master washes over him. It feels as if I have become a veteran mercenary who has lived their whole life on the battlefield. Memories of the fierce female mercenary's brutal clashes flash through his mind. I think I now understand the master's intention in choosing this sword. It's not just for its strength and technique, but he wanted to show me her life itself, the will that never gives up, even in the face of immense trials. He looks up with a renewed sense of respect. That indomitable spirit. Would it hurt to tell me things like this from the start? Suddenly, a heavy footstep crunches in the dirt, shattering the quiet night. The boy flinches violently, scrambling backward as Petal emerges from the dark woods. It seems you've regained consciousness, young master, the knight says kindly, then pauses as he sees the boy's defensive stance. I just went to fetch some drinking water, but oh dear. Crouched in a fighting stance, the boy glares at the towering man. Petal sighs deeply. It seems there are still misunderstandings between us to resolve. The ancestor crosses his spectral arms, observing the knight. There's no need to be so wary, young descendant. That man is not the kind to cause you harm. Even with the reassurance, a bead of sweat rolls down the boy's tense face. Well, even so, I suppose suspicion is unavoidable. Petal gives a slow, understanding nod. I understand, given what you have been through. It cannot be easy to lower your guard. He slowly unhooks his gear, letting his heavy pouch drop to the floor to show he means no harm. Then, if I were to tell you my story first, would you be able to lower your guard? Petal steps forward and reaches for the collar of his shirt. Why I came all the way here. The boy recoils in shock as Petal pulls back the fabric, laying his torso bare. What are you doing right now? Petal continues. Allow me to formally introduce myself, young master. My name is Petal, a retired knight, a wanderer with nowhere to go, and a horrific, pulsing purple corruption spiderwebs across the knight's chest. A terminally ill patient on the verge of death. The sinister mana burns within him, eating away at his life force. Even high priests who have studied medicine all their lives have affirmed it, that I have a month left at most. The boy stares at the lethal affliction in sheer disbelief. I am nothing more than a mere sick man waiting for death, Petal says softly. Petal looks down at the young master, asking gently, so would you please listen to my story for a moment? After the brief commotion settled, the two finally sat down to talk.